Hi, I'm Bob Schutz from the John Paul II Healing Center. And I want to talk to you about isolation and how do we heal these wounds of isolations that many of us have experienced during the pandemic. Just a distinction between isolation and solitude. We can be alone and not be isolated. And, that's what the word solitude means. And we see this in many of the hermits and monks, and also when we go on silent retreat. Uh, I know when I was on silent retreat many years ago, a 9 day silent retreat, first couple of days I really struggled with that sense of being alone. And then as I got quiet in the silence, I began to realize I'm not alone, that I was there to pray, I was there to be in communion with God, with the communion of saints. And so the rest of that time was really very beautiful, that time of communing. But I also had a spiritual director that I could meet with and have that interaction. And so I think it's important that we have in our solitude both an interaction with God, with Jesus, that's real and vital and life giving, but also this communion with other people. Because communion is what we're created for. We're created by a communal God, a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit who live in communion with one another. And as God spoke to Adam at the very beginning, it's not good for man to be alone. We're created for relationship with God and we're created for relationship with each other. And when this is threatened, like it was during the pandemic, we see all kind of increases in emotional and spiritual and psychological health and even physical health. What we find out from research is that when people are isolated and they have an experience of being cut off from vital relationships, that our immune systems suffer. So while we're trying to protect our health, we're actually harming our health by that isolation. Also, depression increases during times of isolation. Uh, all kinds of addictions, alcoholism during the pandemic went up considerably. Also, the use of pornography, other kinds of sexual compulsions really increased. There's a higher suicide rate during the pandemic because of isolation. So isolation can be a very dangerous thing, and we need to know how to combat it. And so how do we do that? How do we face areas of isolation in our life and combat that? The first is in prayer. Uh, each one of us needs to, in isolation, recognize that we're really not alone, that we're surrounded by the communion of saints, by the angels, and that Jesus is with us, and so we can be in constant communication. And so if you look at monks and hermits who live a lot of time in solitude, they stay alive, they stay healthy, they stay vibrant by that ongoing communication. We think of some of the saints, even like St. John of the Cross, who was put in a isolation for a long period of time, and yet he wrote the most beautiful poetry because of his prayer life during that time. And so we can be alone without being isolated. And yet we also need human relationships. And so how do we do that in a situation of what we lived through? I know for me it became really important when I was alone during the day to go and have time with my family in the evening. I live alone right now because my wife died, but I have children and grandchildren around and brothers and sisters. And so it became really important during the pandemic to consciously go and have meals together. I know some were afraid to do that because of COVID, but I think the isolation was a greater risk than the sickness for many people. Uh, what else can we do? I know most of us began to work on Zoom, and so there was human interaction. It wasn't the same as being together, and now that it's over, I hope we can begin to revisit that. Same with church. We were watching church virtually, and as good as that was to have a regular ongoing uh, church community, there's nothing like being back in person. It's been such a great experience to be back and to receive Jesus physically in the Eucharist and to be with other people and to celebrate together. The same with social interaction. Now that things are loosening up, to go to sporting events together. We took them for granted. To go to a restaurant and to see other people, to be able to walk down the streets or to go to soccer games for the grandkids or children or your own sporting events. All of that is so important and so life-giving. What's also important is that we have ongoing spiritual community. And if you have let that go or if that's gotten interrupted during the time of the pandemic, I really encourage you to reestablish that. Not to become frenetic in it, not to be overcommitted, but to find a few concentrated relationships where you can be personally invested, to be seen and known and understood and have a sense of belonging. All that and much more will help heal the wounds of isolation. So I encourage you to invest in that. And may God bless you.